affecting women on this Women's Month, when we once again turn our focus on issues affecting them and, of course, this hour, the justice system. The Department of Justice and Constitutional Development is the custodian of promoting and protecting the rights of the vulnerable groups, especially your women and children. Let us now look deeper into sexual offences and gender-based violence with the Deputy Director General responsible for legislative from the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development, Kalay Pillay. Ma'am, good afternoon to you. Thank you so much indeed for joining us here on SA Today.
Good afternoon to you.
Now, we've been of late hearing a lot about sexual abuse and gender-based violence. Just give us a brief explanation of the two, as just to bring understanding.
We have several laws in place to deal with sexual offences. One of the most important is the Sexual Offences Act, which sets out the nature of the crime, it sets out the rights of the victims, it sets out the offences, and it sets out the term of imprisonment a person may be liable to spend should they be convicted of an offence. We've recently, the Act was amended several years ago to strengthen the laws that were in place. And many people are aware of the fact that the crime of rape is literally an epidemic in our country, and we needed to strengthen our laws so that we protect our victims better. But we can have as many laws as we could write to attend to the scourge of this violent behavior. But I think what we need more is in terms of how we implement these acts and to bring the perpetrators to justice. What we have done in terms of the Sexual Offences Act is that we have taken an integrated approach in terms of how we deal with sexual offences and how we prosecute these crimes. This is done essentially through the Thuthuzela care centres, which exist throughout the country, where we take an integrated approach to the reporting, investigation, and eventually the prosecution of the crime in court. What we have is, when you report the crime, you would get your services at one stop so that you do not have to be sent to the hospital, to the police station, to the prosecutor, etc. What this prosecution of these crimes run through the Thuthuzela care centres is a prosecutor-driven investigation. And it also links up to the Department of Health so that you are given services as quickly as possible so that the prosecution of the crime can proceed quickly. I think the entire aim of the Thuthuzela care centres is to prevent secondary victimization of victims, which we understand is also a very big problem, and it keeps victims away from reporting these serious crimes, and eventually perpetrators escape the might of the law when they do not report such cases.
Yeah, and part of the concerns,
I think there are currently, I must add that there are currently 55 Thuthuzela care centres throughout the country in all 9 provinces. And of course, victims are encouraged to report sexual offences when they do occur. Although I think it should not be a case where you are afraid to report a crime because it happened a long time ago. I think we are all aware of a recent case which said there are no prescription in terms of a time period when you may report a case and have it prosecuted. But of course, in terms of a rape case, for instance, evidence is obviously, in all sexual offences, evidence is very important, but it's not impossible to report a case late if that is the case.
Yeah, I wanted to come
so
in
that's
there.
Essentially
can
what
I just come in there, Ms. Pillay?
Legislation provides for in terms of sexual offences. But I must add that there's also other legislation that provides protection for victims of harassment generally and domestic violence as well. We are very familiar with the Domestic Violence Act, which allows people in a domestic environment to obtain a protection order against the perpetrator of harassment within the domestic environment. But there is also a Protection from Harassment Act where you need not be in a domestic situation with your stalker, for instance, It may be somebody that you don't even know, but this person is stalking you and you want to lay a charge against them so that it can be reported. You can also obtain what is called a protection from harassment order. Now, these protection orders actually signals that the victim has notified the police and the court system that there is this person that is harassing them and they are seeking the protection of the law. If there's a violation of the protection order, then there's obviously consequences that arise out of the violation of those orders. I think in the protection from harassment...
Ms. Pillay, are you able to hear me? Are you able to hear me?
Yes, I can hear you
All
now.
right, thank you so much indeed. I just wanted to come in there and say part of the concerns and perhaps the criticism to your department by many sexual offences victims is that the department is basically dragging its feet in finalising these matters. This was also raised last week by the hashtag Total Shutdown marchers when they marched across the country to say that the justice system is failing us altogether. What do you have to say?
I don't think that the department is dragging its feet as such. What we would have is obviously from the point of reporting a case to the point of it getting to the courts for the prosecution to take place. I've outlined that the Thuthuzela Care Centres is essentially established to ensure that we do not drag our feet, that we have an integrated approach, that the evidence is collected, that the prosecutor is involved, that the prosecutor leads the investigation so that all the statements, etc., are collected so that the case is prosecution ready as soon as possible. It is also court directed so that there are no delays when the matters should be taken to court. I think if there are specific cases of delays, we would like to know of those cases. Obviously, I think there's a raft of services as well when a victim gets to court in terms of giving evidence, for witnesses to be able to give evidence. We have witness fees. We have services within the court structures in terms of separate courtrooms. We try to remove as much of the secondary victimization in the entire process from reporting up to prosecution and finalization of the case.
All right.
Obviously, there may be cases where evidence is not available or witnesses are not available, but as far as possible, our aim is to ensure that these cases are prosecuted and finalized as soon as possible.
All right, two things quickly. Please be very brief with your answers on the two issues here. You've been referring to the Thuthuzela Care Centres, and I do know that the department also established the Sexual Offences Courts. I think it was back in 2013, if my memory serves me well. Do our communities even know of the existence of these two structures? And lastly, you also make mention of the protection orders that the victims of gender-based violence can acquire against their perpetrators. But we've seen it happening throughout that in some instances, the victims even die in the hands of their perpetrators, whom they have protection orders against. How do you respond to those two issues?
The information regarding our services is readily available at all courts. We've carried out massive campaigns in terms of community education as well, but I really think that we do need to do more. We need to improve, and I think every year when it's Women's Month, we tend to up our outreach programs, but I think it needs to be an ongoing program. We need to ensure that women are aware of the fact and victims of gender-based violence are aware of where they can report cases, and we will definitely give attention to those areas where the services are not being reached by victims, and to ensure that the courts are adequately equipped to address the concerns of the communities that it serves.
All right, thank you so much for coming through. Many thanks to Kalay Pillay. She is Deputy Director responsible for legislative development from the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development, live from our studios in Pretoria.